snippets in Flash are located right here with this icon in your tool palette. Otherwise, under Window, you can go and find Code Snippets, and it comes up with a dialog that looks like this. And if you twirl these down, you can find that there's a number of options available to you as far as basic actions. So what we'll be looking at most specifically this morning is timeline navigation. How to make something stop at a particular frame. We'll create buttons that allow us to go to a new frame. So we'll set some of those kinds of things up so that we can start jumping through the timeline, because a big component of building something as an interactive is giving the user the ability to experience things in a non-linear manner. So if you imagine, it would be along the lines of the story. Got to go find my brush here. So if you were telling a story, your story starts out and then you reach a decision point. You have option A or option B. If you take option A, it goes down this path. Something unfolds, and now we might have 2 or even 3 more options. If we go down this path, we go and realize there are no more options. That was a dead end. Then we have 3 options out of here. So we're giving the user a chance to explore. And it might be, if I choose on this option, now option A or B, one of those options could point to that dead end. Another option could go back to here at the beginning. So what we realize is we can construct a flow chart, a diagram of how the user can experience the content that you've created. Much like there are books, choose your own adventure series books, where you get to the end of a chapter and it says, do you go through door A or do you go through door B? If you want A, go to page 56. If you want door B, go to page 128. And then you have a few more pages of text on each one of those, and then another decision point. So these books are still in both paperback version, but they've now even made interactive iPad and iPhone apps that allow you to experience these choose your own adventure books in an actual interactive way. But they're kind of the non-digital version of an interactive story, because you get to choose where you're going to go. So that's part of what we'll be building with this. As we work on your final project, we'll be looking at experiencing a number of ways of generating choices, allowing the end user to make choices about how their project, their story, is going to unfold. So to do that, what I'm first going to start out with is just put some stuff on the timeline so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to just create a box. And with this box, I will then convert it to a movie clip so I can animate it. And if I want to animate this over the course of, I'm going to just use 80 frames, because then it's easy to see. So beginning, and I'll have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Put it up there so we can see. Now if I save this, and save it to now run my Swift, we'll see the box goes up, the box goes over, and then it rewinds back to the beginning. Now, a nice thing that happens when you use the code snippets is Adobe has recommended for a long time that code appears on its own layer. And when you use the code snippets, it creates a new layer for you, names that new layer for you, and then puts the snippet on it. So it's a pretty smart system that they have put together here. So if I want, when my animation gets to the end, if I want this to now just stop, so if I want my main timeline here to stop, to do that, I can go in my code snippets, look at timeline navigation, and choose stop at this frame. To select a snippet, I double click on it, and eventually it comes up, and now it opened my actions window. Your actions window will be smaller and look about like this when it first comes up. The left-hand side gives you access to other aspects or other parts of the ActionScript code, and you can look through that. We don't need to see that column for now. I just care about seeing the code. Now if I stretch this a little bit bigger, we can also see that inside this code they have put quite a bit of commentary. These are called comments. All of the snippets have very liberal comments in them that help explain to you what is going on. So the comment here specifies what it does, and it gives you kind of a more verbose explanation of that. The actual command is the word that shows up in blue. This is a method. That's the proper terminology here. Methods are actions. Think of them as verbs. In this case, we say stop. We're giving it a command. We say stop, and because it's a method, it has parentheses after it. The semicolon is the ActionScript equivalent of a period at the end of a sentence. So every line of code, you put a semicolon at the end of it to say, I have now reached the end of my line of code. ActionScript does not care about white space, so I could put in a bunch of extra returns, and then if I had more code to type, I could type that in now at this point. If I wanted just to do a basic comment, a one-line comment, I use 2 slashes and go, see white space does not matter. So I can put that in. So it's been added. If I test my movie, the box moves, and it stops at the end where it's supposed to. So that's the basic part of getting the code in. We can now notice in the timeline, it added a keyframe, it added a layer called actions, and then because my cursor was at the point where I wanted the stop to occur, it added a keyframe there on its own. I didn't have to add that, and there's a little A on that keyframe indicating there is code occurring there. So when you look in the timeline and you see that little A, that indicates there is code on that frame. Now, one of the requirements in ActionScript is you are not able to put code on objects. You put code on frames. That's a requirement. Code can be on frames, or code can be in an external AS or ActionScript file. We're not going there at this point, but that is eventually where you get to when you start doing coding with Flash, is you move all of your code off of the timeline and into a separate AS file. It actually works much better at that point, but it's more complex in the beginning. So currently my project starts out, I'll minimize this, and it animates, gets to the end, and stops. So on your previous animation project, if you wanted to prevent the project from looping forever, all you had to do is put the cursor at the very end, go to snippets, and you could have put in this action to stop it at that point. Now, what I am going to do next is I'm going to add a layer. I'm going to put 3 buttons on it, and then code these buttons so that those buttons can take me to the first frame, the middle frame, or the last frame. So we're going to make that happen. So this is a tween layer right here. If I want to put buttons down, I can't just create them on that layer. If I try, we can see that the tool has the little circle with the line through it indicating it's unhappy with me. So I need to add a new layer. So I'm going to label this one first. I'll just call this box animation. And now if I add a new additional layer, I'm going to call this layer buttons. And now I'm going to create some button objects. Now, since I animated a box, I'm going to use the circle tool or ellipse tool, oval tool for making my buttons. So I have a new layer. I've titled it buttons, grab the circle tool, and now I'm going to make a button. So I just made a circle. So after you've created your shape, we're going to convert it to a symbol. Hopefully you didn't get ahead of me here and convert it on your own, because this time I'm going to do something different. There's the third symbol type we have not used yet. We had movie clip, we've had graphic, but there's a third one called a button. Now, technically, you don't have to use the button symbol. You could create your own button object, and you could specify the different pieces of artwork for that button object, And through the power of ActionScript or code, you can now navigate to specific frames or pieces of artwork for that button. That's what we used to do back in the day before Flash and its button object. So if you built an interactive and you wanted a rollover state, a down state, visited state, you had to create all the individual graphics for it. So if you've created CSS buttons where you create your different pieces of artwork, yeah, we've had to do that. And then you have to code that as well. Flash, way back, I started version 3. Version 3 had it. I'm assuming version 2 did. Version 1 was just an animator. So if I choose the button object here, and now I can just name this my button. Hit OK. Now it's a button object. Now the cool part about a button object is a 4-frame movie clip. That's really what a button is. It's a 4-frame object. So I have this button object on screen here. Now if I look in my property panel, I will see there is the icon that's different. If I go and look in my library, the movie clip has the gear icon. The button has the little rectangle with a finger pointing at it, indicating it's an interactive type object. And if I double click on my button, I will now notice that I get a very specialized looking timeline. Instead of unlimited frames, I have up, over, down, and hit as part of it. Those are the 4 aspects of the button that I care about. I have my up state. Now on my over state, if I click in the timeline and hit F6, I can then take that artwork that is there and I can change it to be something else. I could even go and add more to it. So I'm going to even add some more to it. So now my button, I have an overstate. So if I look at up, when I roll over it, it will turn yellow and get little lines around it. And then if I go to my down state, click in the timeline, hit F6 to add a keyframe. Down state, I want to get rid of those lines. Probably would have been faster to use the eraser tool, but this worked. You can click on the circle, fill it with something else, and if I wanted to, actually I don't even want that circle anymore. I'm just going to paint something for my down state. So when we look at this, we can see we have up, over, down. Now before I continue on any further, what I am going to do is I'm going to just test my movie here. And we can see if I roll over my button, it shows the up state. If I push down on it, it shows that down state. Now the hit frame is the area that renders the button active. It's the spot that when I put my mouse into it, the button now becomes active. Typically, if you don't define the hit state, whatever is in the up state is the active area. So currently, I have a circle. So when I look at this, when I put my mouse in that circle, it becomes active. But if my up state or my hit state is different than that, so if my hit state is just simply going to be oops, wrong tool. So if my hit state, if I just make something smaller, so that's smaller than the original shape, now we see that I can go red, red, red. So it's not until I get to where that blue circle is my active hit area. Normally, Your hit state should be the same as your up state or fairly close to it. Otherwise, it will leave your users confused. So that's the first part about creating, and I keep grabbing my interface wrongly. That's the first part on creating the button. So I have my rollover state, my down state, and that's much easier than trying to hand code something using CSS or having to do all of the action script to say when I put my mouse over, my mouse out, my mouse down, my mouse up outside, all of these different operations that we have to keep track of. Having this button object in Flash is just a really nice way of working.